Welcome to the Analog Gamers Podcast, a short podcast on board games and board gaming experiences. Here are your hosts.
I'm Shane.
And I'm Brent.
And I'm Frank.
Hey, welcome back to our podcast. We're excited to have you with us today. Today we're going to talk about social contracts in gaming. Now, this isn't anything you got to sign. It's not anything that's necessarily, accepted across the board, but just kind of what our ideas.
Wow, that was so funny.
Maybe it should be.
Maybe it should be. But things that we think when you sit down at the table, what are you agreeing to? So when you come to a board game, you're maybe looking at joining a group that plays, maybe going out to a cafe and playing. What are some of those kind of expectations that people have about kind of the behavior of the table, of the commitment of the table, kind of the unwritten rules of gaming? So Frank, what are some of those unwritten rules of gaming?
I want to start with Monopoly, and we just put this out front. You don't flip the table. I don't care how bad you're doing, you don't flip the table.
I've never flipped it from Monopoly. There was a Scrabble board once that went across the room.
I did intentionally tank my position in Monopoly one time to get out of the game. But at any rate, that's another story, which I think I've actually told on this podcast.
So this is actually, I think, one of the first ones. What's the expectation when you are just losing the game? You know you're going to lose. What's your obligation to stay in games, even if you know there's 0% chance of winning?
And I know we've talked about this one, and I think all of us have done it poorly, as well as potentially done it well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think number one, if you sit down to play a game, you got to play it to the end.
You got to play it to the agreed upon end.
Right. Yes.
Right.
And I'm going to say that because there have been games we've all played that we've said, this game is over.
Yeah.
We could sit here and we can play the game to the end, but this game is over. And it sounds like your guys' Acquire game was like that. It should have been over.
So I dropped that Acquire game. So for those of you who didn't listen to the last episode, it was an Acquire game that went unusually long and went past the normal end game conditions. They never showed up. So he just played till there were no more legal moves. I dropped, I don't know, a half a dozen hints that we already know who's going to win. This game's effectively over. And no one picked up on them to actually finish the game out and say, okay, let's agree to end.
I heard you. I just felt like I needed to give you the experience of playing till that end game condition.
You didn't even know there was a difference. Give me a break.
I felt it.
Having never played the game before.
Do you think there is ever a time that it is okay for you to leave a table before the game is over or agreed upon over?
So I think we need to first state that this is two different kinds of games. One is a game where there is no player elimination. I think that's what you're talking about. A player elimination game, I think, is a different story.
Well, no, then you're eliminated. You still don't walk away unless you're eliminated.
Right, but can you drive yourself to that elimination?
Yeah.
If it's within the rules, if it's within the rules, yeah.
I mean, socially acceptable. Can you drive yourself to that elimination and say,
I think so.
I know I'm done in this game. I want to be done in this game. I'm going to get myself to be done in this game.
Okay, so what about the ones that are in between where you can be eliminated as a character, but you respawn as a new character? What about, do you think then it can be appropriate for you to back out of the game if you have a character that's been eliminated and you have to start over with a new character?
So, give me an example.
Our famous example of Merchants and Marauders, right? In that game, you can be eliminated as a character, whatever captain you are, but then you enter as a new captain upon elimination.
So
in that
if that happened in that game, and I've only played it once, so I don't know. Under those circumstances, is your presence completely removed from the board? That
yes,
character's?
Yes.
Okay, then I think at that point in time you could negotiate that. If everybody's okay with it, I think you could walk away. Because you're not leaving a hole in the game. It's not like, well, he's still got, 6 settlements that we don't know what we're going to do with. He needs to act on behalf of those settlements. That's not the case. He has no more actions taken from the first character. You could negotiate through that and say, I'd prefer to be done. can I step back at this point? I think.
But you think that has to be a negotiation. You don't think the person can just step back because they decide to step back at that point.
I personally would have no problems if the person just unilaterally said, I think I want to be done.
I mean, I'm agreeing with you just because you said negotiation, though. I wanted to clarify.
So I would probably feel like I needed to negotiate if I was the one who wanted out. I would probably negotiate that. I don't know that that's part of the social contract that you will negotiate.
For me, I think it would depend on where in the game we are. So if it's like the start of the game and the person just kind of made a really stupid decision, I would expect them to stay in the game. But if it's at least halfway over or more, then I think it's fine. I mean, it's hard, especially if you've already been eliminated once and this is your second or third time, then I think it's completely acceptable to say, like, I clearly am not going to have an impact on this game.
So I think it's easier for the game moving forward, though, if the person leaves early, because other people aren't making strategic decisions at that point about the fact that there's another player in the game.
I mean, and I can't think of any people that I regularly play games with that I would be upset if that happened. I think if I was maybe out, like at a board game cafe, I don't know how I would react, but I can't imagine in either of my game groups that I would be very upset if somebody backed out.
If they were eliminated, had a chance to come back and chose not to.
Yeah,
specifically.
Okay, then we can go back to games without player elimination.
Yeah,
games that you are, the game expects you to be there the entire game, whether you are or not. And I think that I would agree, or at least I think that the players should be there the entire game. Then that they shouldn't leave, with the exception of, I mean, family life for a lot of game groups comes first.
Sure, there's always going to be those circumstances where there is something in real life that has to take priority and you have to step back. I certainly don't have a problem with that.
Wait. Are you making a distinction between playing a board game in real life? Because I'm not sure there's a big distinction there.
Okay.
No, I got you. Yeah, barring emergencies and all that.
Right.
Because we've all had games where we've started playing and someone just has another commitment.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
They have to step away.
Although I do think part of the social contract is if you should at least have a reasonable expectation, you should not get involved in a game that you think you may not be able to complete. If you have a timed thing, now you're sometimes you might get that wrong, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with somebody stepping back then.
Every time I can think of it happening, the person went into the game saying, I have this time commitment, and talked about it beforehand with everybody, though, as I'm going to have to leave at this. If we get there, I'm sorry.
Certainly in our gaming group.
Yeah.
And there's been times when somebody's been called away and somebody else is free and been able to step in, too. And I think that's okay, too. It's not ideal because, but, it does keep the game alive for everybody else.
So an example of this, I invited a few friends over actually to play Monopoly, with Frank, with your end game conditions, and Jenna got a phone call that one of our really close friends, one of his best friends, had died in a car crash. And so, we wanted to go over and spend time with him and be present and pour into him a little bit. So that was one of those circumstances where I was like, I fully expected to play Monopoly, till the game ended, but there was something that happened. And it was a little awkward because it was at my house, and I was like, y'all stay, you can do whatever, like, we gotta go. And I just gave one of my friends the keys and said, lock up on your way out. But, yeah, I think barring that type of circumstance, I think I do fully expect if we sit down to play a game for everybody to play it till the end.
Or until we go back to it, the agreed upon ending, right? Because there have been plenty of games of either Monopoly or Risk where what's left of the game is predetermined, like that Acquire game. There's no question who was going to win that Acquire game. First time it was ever that lopsided, but there was no question.
I think part of me not wanting to end it early too is because it was the first time I ever played, that was still an opportunity to play out and for me to learn more.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And kind of see it. So,
well, and of course, there were four of us playing, right?
Yeah.
And I was the only person who had played it before. So that's part of the reason why I didn't feel like pushing it. I dropped a few hints, but I wasn't going to push it because nobody else had played it before. And it was like,
yeah, but I definitely think if it was a game we had all played before, I don't think any of us would have had a problem just ending it.
So I want to take one more step back and say social contract. Let's say what we think right up front is at least I'm gonna put this out there as my opinion. It's the things that you want someone or what you would expect someone to do as they sit down at the table.
Their behavior.
Their behavior at the table. So I don't know that we ever defined that up front. And before we move farther, that's how I would define that.
No, you're right. We didn't define it. We should have.
Yeah, I think so. We've also discussed, and we'll have an episode about this, the philosophy of gaming. And there's some crossover, I think, in my mind between a social contract and kind of your philosophy. But for me, the social contract really is that agreement of that one instance of you sitting at the table and what everybody's behavior and self-control or whatever it is going to be.
So, but there's also other aspects to it too, like food, okay, not okay at the table.
Yeah,
and that really
I haven't thought about that.
That's not standard across the board, right? I mean, but at our house, it's a game, right? The only one I'm a little protective of is Dune because it's really hard to find and it's would be expensive to replace. That's the only one I'm a little protective of. Everything else, if something happens to it, something happens to it. I've actually had, it's Daniel's copy of Settlers of Catan, but
was it Daniel's copy before this accident happened?
Yes, it was. It was actually a gift for him. And somebody's kid spilled orange juice all over it. So could have been worse, could have been milk. But, we quickly dried everything off. It didn't absorb anything. Everything was fine. But, at some tables that would not have even been a possibility because you either have your drinks on a TV tray next to you, which to me sounds like more disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah.
May not hit the game, but you're going to spend a lot of time cleaning up. Or you just wait until a break and then everybody goes to eat, stuff like that.
So I think this is why I wanted to bring up the definition, because to me, the social contract also has a lot to do with that negotiation, spoken or unspoken. When you walk into a group playing a game, there's things like that have already either been decided or have to be decided. And those aren't necessarily mannerisms that'll be true everywhere you go or every game you play, but they are mannerisms that you have to watch for and figure out for each kind of group.
Right.
And even sometimes, like when you take your game to somebody else's house, like it's even though it's your game, it's really about where you're taking it into, right? So like for you, right, we have food on the table. We've never really had any issues. But if I bring my game, I have to know that if we're going to play it, people are going to have their food around my game. And so it doesn't matter if I don't want food around my game. If I'm bringing it into this circumstance where this contract has already been established, I can't expect everybody to change it just because it's my game rather than, one of yours.
So that brings up another question. Did you have something else, Brian? So is there a social contract implied, or is there a norm, maybe is a better way to put it, about bringing games to people's houses? So for instance, if I'm going to one of your two houses, is it assumed or kind of the idea is that I will play one of the games that lives at your house rather than bring my own game and try and get us to play? And I think that's very different. When it's a gaming group, I think people bringing games is absolutely fine. When it's not a gaming group, when it's, two families getting together outside the gaming group, is that I don't care if people bring games, but I'm wondering, is that an issue for anybody?
See, I've never cared personally, and I don't know that I would care about that.
The only time I've ever cared is when we've previously discussed playing something, and then somebody brings a game and they like try to dissuade the whole group from what we've already agreed we're going to play the new one, which I think is really less about them bringing a game and them just being like, I'm going to be a party pooper and try to change everybody's mind. I've never been bothered by when people bring games to my house to play. And there have even been times where multiple people bring games and we have time to play 2 or 3 and we say like, all right, well, we've already played one of your games, so let's pick, one of his games or one of her games.
Right.
So there have been some kind of negotiations like that, but I don't think I've ever necessarily minded when people bring games.
Yeah, I don't.
So
Go ahead.
the social aspect of it, though, I think, is if you take a game to someone's house and you haven't prearranged this, be willing to not play your game.
Absolutely.
Don't expect
Yeah,
because you brought
that's
your
huge.
game that your game will get played.
Yeah, I think the only time it would bother me is, and I don't think I've ever had this happen, is if somebody showed up and brought a game and said, I brought a game and it's the only game I'm willing to play. That I would have a problem with.
Yeah.
But that's not so much about social contract of gaming. It's just common courtesy, you know.
There have been times where somebody's brought a game and they're like, this is a brand new game. Like, I really want to play this. But I feel like typically, either my house or yours, like, people are pretty willing to jump in and try it out.
Yeah, I think so too.
And even if it's not that time, you know, maybe the next time.
And unless it's been prearranged that
Right.
we already had a discussion.
Like, don't you dare bring a game when you know Dune is coming
Well,
out. Like,
you can bring it.
it's July. We're
Bring
not
it.
playing another game.
Make sure you take it
advance.
home with you because it's
Yeah,
not gonna.
like I said, I don't think I've ever been bothered by people bringing games.
So, are there any other social contract rules that it may or may not exist or do exist all the time?
So a big one for me is each game stands alone. So like, just because this person beat up on you in the game you previously played, you shouldn't hold a grudge on the next game you play. You know, so if you know, what's a good example? I don't even know. So if you play a game of Clash of Cultures and somebody just completely wipes you out with their military, it's okay to be like a little bit upset. Like, you wanted to win, so it's okay to have those feelings of like, man, I can't believe that happened. But like, Frank, that it's not your fault. I can't be mad at you because you chose a good strategy and beat me. So if you know, we're gonna sit down and play Risk next, like, I can't completely ignore playing the game just to take you out. And I think it's happened to all of us at some point where somebody like goes after us rather than playing the game.
Yes.
And for me, I can't stand that. What do you guys think of that circumstance?
So go ahead, Brent. You go first.
Nah, I'm thinking. So
I would agree. And the problem I have is, I mean, there's two problems with doing that. First of all, is if you know, Billy Bob decides I'm going to gun for Shane and I don't care about anything else. First of all, it damages your game experience because you are targeted and take an undue burden of defending yourself. But the other thing is it impacts everybody else, right? They're not getting an optimal game experience either because they have two less players in the game. They're playing kind of amongst themselves while one person is attack on you in my example, and you're busy trying to defend yourself and just stay alive. So I think that's a huge portion of it.
So I think the only exception to that would be something of the nature of controlling a runaway leader. I mean, if you see someone's doing that and someone does that in multiple games, you got to make sure that you're not mixing those two things. It's not that they're mad at one person. It's because they're trying to control that aspect of the game.
Yeah, but I think there's definitely a difference between managing the skill levels and like understanding the best strategy for me in this game is going to be going against this person, and then just like going for the throat because they made you mad in a previous game.
There is a difference.
Oh, I think there is a difference.
And I don't necessarily mind. You know, there have been times where, you know, I've hosted people and they're all pretty super casual and they all try to block me, or, you know, we play Catan and, you know, they put roads where they think I'm going, and that doesn't necessarily bother me because they're still trying to win.
Right.
You know, they're still trying to get the most points. And it's not, you know, this kind of anger reflexive thing. It's just the best way for me is to not let Shane win.
So what bothers you is when people are doing things to potentially the detriment of their own game, specifically to get back at someone else, maybe.
Yeah, it's that retribution thing. I think that's probably the best word to use, retribution. And so I think that's another social contract aspect, is that everybody playing the game is trying to win.
So what happens, and I've heard this topic come up on other podcasts and in blogs. What happens when I'm playing a game and I cannot win? How do you guys feel about me then playing Kingmaker and starting to help somebody else win versus playing my own game? Playing for the best of the best result I can get.
That bugs the heck out of me.
The king making?
Yeah.
See, it doesn't bother me at all.
Just the reason it bothers me is, so like when we were playing Acquire, I knew I wasn't going to win, but I was trying to do the best that I could and get the best place out of 4 that I could. So it wasn't necessarily about, propping anybody else up. It was, well, if I can get 3rd rather than 4th, like I'm going to go for that. So I think it bugs me because I think you should always play your best to get the best place. Cause I don't win a lot of games, but I get second a lot and I'm pretty content with that because, I simply I'm not going to win every single game. So Brent, it doesn't bug you. Why does it not bug you?
It doesn't bug me. I feel like you're still then playing a game. I mean, you're still trying to do something in the game itself.
How do you decide which person you're going to support?
Which person?
Wait. He said it doesn't bother him. Do you do it?
I think I have done it in the past. And I think that usually what I end up doing is trying to pick someone that's towards the bottom and help them move up the ranks.
Okay. I guess it's just, for me, it gets to the point of like, when you ask yourself, who am I going to choose to support? That's where the issue with me comes in. And if it's like, oh, well, I'm better friends with this person than that person, or, well, that person won last game, so I really want them to lose. I think some of that stuff bugs me.
So then there's a similar question, and that is, if you're in a position where you can't win, is it okay to play suboptimally to achieve some secondary goal? So in other words, let's use this example. Playing a game, I realize that I'm going to come in well behind the person who's going to win, maybe not even second. But so I've decided, here's this other strategy that I want to play around with, even though at this point in time it's going to be worse instead of better because I'm not in a position to really execute. Or here's a portion of the rules that we've never gotten to because we've never had the situation come up. I'm going to force the situation come up because I want to explore that portion of the rules. Is that okay? I'm not playing optimally.
I think that's fine because you're investigating the game. Again, when we played Acquire, I kept making purchases that y'all were like, why are you doing that? That's so stupid. But the idea was, I knew I wasn't going to win. I knew I wasn't going to get second, but I thought that strategy might get me 3rd. And even though I knew that it wasn't the optimal strategy, I thought that it might prove to get me where I was trying to go. And so I think I've done that before. And I think when you're investigating the game, I think anytime you do that, I think that's great. To really challenge the game and challenge the rules and the gameplay.
I would agree. I would even go back to say, I think there's a time to play Kingmaker in that it will get you also a higher position by potentially bringing down someone else as you're playing. And I think that's where some other strategies might come in handy is if you start doing things to point out ways that other people can handle things in the game that they might not have seen or understood at that point.
Although there are people who would say that's not king making. If you're still playing to optimize your position, that's not really king making.
I think when I think of king making, it's like, I'm going to tank myself as much as possible just in order to make this person win.
It can also, but it can look like king making to everyone except yourself.
Especially during the game.
During the game, yeah.
Yes, that is true.
I mean, if you look like you're bringing someone else up and tearing someone else down, that always looks like king making.
Yeah.
Even if there's some hidden agenda behind it.
Although I guess I will say king making only bothers me if I was the person that was winning and I end up not winning. Let's be realistic. That's the only time it really bothers me.
Really?
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, other times I'm like, why would you do that? But the only time it really bothers me is when I'm the one that loses because of it. Which is incredibly selfish to say, but is realistic.
So the other thing I would bring up that and this is a instance that happened as much as anything else. We were playing a game, and the game was the Resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a person who effectively, so in the Resistance, you've got, if you think about this in terms of Star Wars for you listeners, you've got your Resistance cell fighting the evil empire, and there's a group of you who are true to the cause, and there's another group of you who are actually part of the evil empire trying to ruin the plans of the Resistance group. And the evil empire players know each other, and you're trying to figure this out. And then the end goal is to get best 3 out of 5 missions successful or fail. So this person, one of the ways that the evil guys can score a point is if the team that's proposed to go on the mission, and I don't want to get too deep into the rules, but if that vote to establish a team fails 5 times. And this person, even though they were on the good side, kept failing votes because they wanted to be on a team. And they weren't going to get on. There was just so many people in this game that it was not everybody was going to get on a team. Mm-hmm. There were like 9 of us in this game. So, but they were playing because they wanted to be. Now all they get to do is vote. It seemed kind of crazy, but Daniel was so upset that he has no desire to play games with this person again because of the way they were behaving. Everybody came to the conclusion that they were actually on the evil empire side.
Yeah.
And the game was lost because they played that with that self-interest in mind rather than the self-interest of how do I or my team win. It was how do I guarantee a certain participation level that I want. How do you guys feel about that?
Oh, I would have not been happy. That just seems so immature to me. And that comes back to like you play to win, right? Everybody sits down at the table expecting to win. Now, if you're on turn 9 of 10 turns and you're not going to win, then you can investigate the game, you can support other players, whatever that is. But when you're just like upset because you don't get to do what you want to do, and so you tank your team, I would not have been happy.
I wouldn't have been happy about it.
Yeah. Okay.
Mainly because I didn't want to be in the game at that point. Come on.
Well, that's right. So, and in all honesty, I figured that's what you guys would answer, but I didn't know if you guys saw a nuance to that.
Well, and I think we've all, like taken one for the team where we've been in a game, we're not enjoying it, but we know, we sat down to play it, so we have to see it to the end. We've all done that.
Yes.
And I think that's part of that social contract too, is sometimes, like when you enter into a group, so say you're part of a game group, knowing that you're not always going to have the best experience with every game and being okay with that and being willing to have those games that you just don't enjoy, but you play them because you're part of the group, you're part of the games that are coming to the table.
Yeah. I was in a game of Revised Risk one time, and for those of you who don't know Revised Risk, there is no player elimination. It's a game of opportunism is really what it is. But I ended up with Japan. That was it. And because all I had was Japan, I could never get enough momentum to go any further than just Japan for about the second half of the game. And it was really frustrating, but you're in it for the long haul at that point, right? So you got to do it. So are there any social contracts when it comes outside the game? Are there any social contracts about picking games to play or anything like that? We should have one in our group that we pick one within 15 minutes, but we can't ever seem to do that.
If we were going to do that, though, we'd have to come up with a list that said if we don't pick in 15 minutes, this will be played.
We're going to play Monopoly.
To force the issue.
Yeah, are there any others?
I think the only one that I can think of is if it's going to be a learning game, that everyone at the table is going to learn it. So there's not someone to teach the game. That has to be decided up front. That has to be communicated up front. I think it's okay to play those games, but I think everyone at the table has to understand and know going in, this is not going to be a smooth experience.
Right.
And we're going to stumble and fight and probably get things wrong.
And winning doesn't really matter in this one because we'll probably have enough rules wrong that's kind of inconsequential anyway.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true because I do not like playing those games at all.
So
At all.
there's another, I guess, rule I think goes with that, and that is it has to be discussed up front. But I think it's okay if there's you need a learning game to say we're going to play X number of turns and then we're going to stop and we're going to start over, or we're going to stop. And if everyone agrees that they want to continue, we'll continue, but otherwise we'll start over. But somehow saying, okay, we're going to play long enough to learn the mechanisms, then realizing that we've made a complete mess of things strategically because we had no idea how these things interact strategically. We're going to scrap it and start over so we have a clue. And I think that's okay, but I do think part of that social contract is if that's what you're going to do, it needs to be discussed up front.
Yeah, I agree. I think a related one that I absolutely live by, and both of you have done this, is if you're teaching a game, to also teach strategy. Because I hate being thrown into a game where somebody says, here's the rules, A, B, C, and D, and then they just crush me.
Yes.
Like, what was the point? Why did you invite me to play this game?
Right.
And, obviously there's different levels of teaching it. There have been games where we say, here's what you need to know for the first 4 turns. I'm going to tell you the rest once we get through there.
Right.
And I'm okay with that too, but I think when you teach a game, I think you have to be willing to teach some strategy, even if it hurts you in that game.
I agree.
I think the role as a teacher is very different than the role as just a player. So.
Although I will say there have been a number of games I've taught where I've played just enough turns so I can teach it. And someone will say, so strategically, what do I need to do? And I can honestly say to them, I've never played a full game of this. I don't have a clue. I'm just as lost as you are. I just know how to go through the motions of actually playing the game correctly, but I don't know long term how anything affects anything else. And I think that's okay.
Yeah, and there have been times where, so like when you taught me Star Wars Rebellion, probably about half the game, right, you would answer questions, and then it got to a point where we said, like, okay, I'll ask rules questions, but like I should know enough of the game now and enough of the general strategy to play it on my own.
So we have one person in the gaming group who asks questions a lot. And eventually this person, we have literally said, okay, you now have enough knowledge of this game that you shouldn't have to ask these questions anymore. And they're strategic questions, not just rules questions. So we're cutting you off. You're on your own from this point on.
And you're already winning.
Yes. With this person, a lot of times they are winning.
And I think that's okay. But I think if you're teaching a game to new players, you have to teach some strategy.
I think if you know it, right? I mean, if it's brand new to everybody at the table, that's
right.
fine.
But then I wouldn't say you're the teacher. You're just kind of the blind leading the blind.
It depends. I mean, there are games where rules-wise you can be teaching it.
You playing the game by yourself is not the same as playing with a group of people, though. So you might not have any clue what strategy to actually play when someone other than you is making moves.
Yeah,
even though you know the game and you know the mechanic well enough to teach it.
Are you thinking of Twilight Struggle they talked about in the introduction episode?
Any of the games he plays by himself because he wants to play by himself.
So in every game I own because I want to know it before I play with others.
Twilight Struggle, do you really get a sense? Did you really get a sense for what the strategy is when you're just playing against yourself?
So in the sense of, I would know if a player lays down a card that's going to really hurt them. And so in that circumstance, I would say, before we go down that road, like, let me explain to you what I think the result is going to be. So,
do you have enough game knowledge to do that from that playthrough?
On a few things, yes.
Okay.
Now, to say teach strategy, to the best of my ability to teach strategy.
Okay. Yeah.
Not to say this is the optimal strategy in this game in this circumstance,
well,
but to say this is what I think the outcome of this is going to be. So for example, teaching Seven Wonders, right? To say strategy-wise, make sure you're taking some resources in the first age, right? That's not in the rules. Like, you could not take any resources in the first age, and that's completely within the rules.
Right.
Now, that's not me saying which resources should you take, what order do you want to, what's going to work out best, by the third age. But to say generally, make sure you're taking resources. That type of thing, to help the brand new player know, generally speaking, what some good archetypes and strategies are.
So I think I said it when we played that game of Acquire. I think I said very on in the game, don't run out of money.
Yes. So that was a great example.
If you run out of money, it can set you back for the whole game. And
You
then
said it, and several of us did it.
And then I
but
promptly ran out of money first before anybody else.
I always run out of money playing Acquire. It's just what happens.
yeah, so that type of thing of just kind of letting
John did
people
not.
know,
Of course not.
letting people know generally some of the strategies that
Yeah.
happens.
I agree. Okay, so any others?
For today, I don't have any.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there probably are some of those like food at the table type things that we all kind of have.
No cheese, no Cheetos. That's. I don't care if you bring food, no Cheetos.
Yeah.
Anything
Anything
that leaves
dusty.
orange dust on your hands
Yeah,
is
anything
off
dusty.
the table. I don't even care about. You can bring chicken wings. I'm okay with that. We'll hand out wipes, whatever. But orange dust stays forever.
I think that is even just, I know it sounds silly, but the food situation in general of like people knowing, yes, we're going to eat dinner before or we'll have snacks during. Because and this is a general life thing, I hate going to somebody's house
And not knowing.
and not knowing. Or they're like, yeah, come over at 7 for dinner. But they really mean we're going to start cooking at 7. So we're not eating till 8 or 8:30. And I'm like,
That one doesn't bother me too much because you never know what circumstances. And now we're digressing from gaming.
I'll say
But that
we-
one
we
doesn't.
digress.
these are life contracts.
That one doesn't bother me as much because you don't know what impacted their day. But it is one of the reasons why in the game group, when we're talking to a new person, or at least when I am, I say, here's the way the day goes. Here's who brings snacks. We will have dinner. You're not required to stay for dinner, but you're welcome to stay for dinner. And make sure all those things are explained so that people can make the choices that they want to make.
Yeah, so I guess we could just kind of summarize this by just like letting people know before they come kind of what the general expectations and context of that game experience are going to be.
That being said, before I came to the first game group, I had no context at all. They
That's-
just said, "We're gonna go here." Okay.
Well, that's because I didn't know you guys. You got all your information from Kay.
I got all my information from Lindsay.
And-
who
well,
got her
that's right,
information
that's
from
true.
Kay.
It just sounds like you're blaming your wives.
And
guys.
but the other thing is, I don't know that it was really all that settled when you guys started coming. I don't think it really started settling out until a year or so later
Probably
that
not.
we really got it settled. But we were kind of bouncing around for a while, so I don't know that Kay could have given you the whole story.
I think the other thing is, if you're just inviting people over, so say 4 or 5 people, don't invite people that you know really don't like each other. Know your group. I think that's an important,
Okay,
right? Like,
yeah.
Okay.
I have some people that I would never ask to sit down and play a board game together because I know it just would not be a good experience. So, not doing that.
So on that note, I think we've come up with everything that we have to say on the topic. It sounds like the common thread with all of this is communicate up front, vote early, vote often kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And make sure that you tell each other what expectations are, whether it's for your group or for you individually. The only expectation we have of you, the listener, is that you spread the word about our podcast.
And
Hopefully-
that you listen.
And that you listen yourself. That's true. And hopefully you are doing that. Feel free to drop us a line either through our Facebook page or through email.
Yeah, I really want to know, if you have games, what's the one game that you will not allow food at the table for? So Frank, you're Dune, you're like very anxious. You're like, don't spill anything on my Dune. Listeners, what is your game that you expressly forbid food from being around?
And then the other thing is, if you are getting to us via iTunes, rate us. That will actually make us more visible on iTunes. So please do that. And yeah, I think Shane's got a great point. I would love to hear what games that you are protective of. And until next time, have a great week.
This has been the Analog Gamers Podcast. Thanks for listening. Please spread the word about our podcast, which can be found at theanaloggamers.libsyn.com. You can email us at theanaloggamers@gmail.com or find us on Facebook as The Analog Gamers. Our intro and outro are recorded by Daniel Feldman. Logo artwork provided by Tabitha Jordan Nichols. The Analog Gamers Podcast is licensed under Attribution, No Commercial, Non-Derivative, Creative Commons 4.0 license.